Hey everybody, and welcome to this underscore webinar. So you are tuned into part 2 of a 4-part series today on unlocking education team productivity using AI. And so what we have found in our research is that over 50% of education teams are using AI to increase the efficiency and the productivity of their teams. And the biggest question that people have is, okay, that's cool. What are they doing? What are they doing? How are they using AI? And that's what we're talking about today. So earlier we heard from Christine Cookich, and she was talking about different ways that she is leveraging AI in customer education with her clients. And now we're going to hear from Doug Pietrzak. So Doug's background, he's a teacher, he's a designer, and he's a product manager. He has a lot of experience at different companies building out education programs that drive business outcomes. And so he's going to be talking about developing rigorous AI-assisted assessments. Just a little housekeeping for our presentation. The chat box is open. So if you want to introduce yourself, let us know where you're calling in from, please do. I think sometimes Zoom defaults to hosts and panelists. So you just want to click everybody so we can all hear from you. If you would like to turn on closed captions, you can do that at the bottom of your screen. If you do have to hop off at any point, this call will be recorded, so we'll send you the recording afterward. And then also, if you have questions as we're going, we'll have some time for dedicated Q&A at the end of Doug's presentation, but he would also love to hear from you in the process. So if you have questions as we're going, please drop those in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll address those as we go. All right, so without further ado, I'll turn it over to Doug, let him introduce himself a little more, and take it from there.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Shannon. If you were here, was anyone here for the last presentation? I'm just kind of curious if we got any folks. You can just kind of raise your hand or say hi or type something in the chat. Okay, cool. There were people. Excellent. Oh, Christine's here. Thank you, Christine. That was awesome. I got to do that while I was finishing or got to watch that while I was finishing my presentation, and that was awesome. I think lots of great content from Christine. I'm sure Intellum is going to be sending out a video afterwards, so you guys can all check out what she had said. If you were there for Christine's presentation, a little bit of how this one contrasts or compares. I think generally speaking, I'm largely in agreement with Christine about a lot of the points. So as an instructional designer, as a whole bunch of different things in my career, generally speaking, I've kind of found a lot of similar things. Like Shannon said, my name's Doug Pietrzak. I run a instructional design shop called FreshCognate. You can find us at freshcognate.com. And here's a little bit about, who is this guy? Why should I care? While I'm doing this, please continue to introduce yourselves in the chat. I love to kind of see who's here, where you're from, etc. And then also, let me share my screen. Forgot about that. Cool. Okay, is that working? I hope so. Okay, excellent. All right, chat's filling up. Good. Yep, so here we are. Again, please introduce yourself. And then also, if you would like, I am very happy to kind of, there's an awful lot of different things to talk about in the world of AI. And if you're coming here with questions, we're going to talk about AI in general and how to use that with designing, building curriculum, assessments in particular. If you do have any questions that you kind of come here with immediately, please do drop those in the chat. I'm very happy. There's an awful lot of directions that this can go in. And I like to teach on the fly and kind of try to hit all of those points. So feel free to drop some questions now. And then, of course, throughout the presentation, you are more than welcome to also ask questions. And we'll have some time at the end to kind of get to all of those. Okay, wonderful. So, yep, welcome in. Oh, we have somebody from Scotland. Okay. Excellent. Here we go. So I originally started as a teacher. Taught in Chicago for a bunch of years. I see some people from Chicago. And then I've also taught internationally. So my background is really, my heart begins as a teacher, a high school teacher, but also kind of K through 12. I also had opportunity to teach in Taiwan and Argentina and some other places. So had the privilege of teaching actually college as well. So all levels, and also now a lot more adults as a professional. So then I had this big bend in my career where I incorporated technology. And so I worked at London.com, I worked at edX, I worked at Google. At Google, I was an instructional designer as well as a product manager. So I kind of transitioned from both using tools to make awesome educational experiences online to then actually helping design and build those tools with people. And so I think that's especially been kind of an interesting segue in my career. At Lynda.com, I also had a big background as a video producer as well. So so I kind of bring a lot of different things to bear when it comes to instructional design. And our shop, or the shop that I have called FreshCognate, our sort of perspective on education, especially when it comes to online education, is to use all of these tools. We have a pretty holistic knowledge of everything it takes to build courses and make them awesome. And so we like to leverage that. We are an in-house video production shop, as well as a writing shop, as well as kind of an everything shop. And what we think is the real main deliverable that we are able to drive towards customers is that we can own learning objectives throughout every material that we create to really make impactful experiences. So that's a big thing we get into is measurement and objectives and things like that, because we also love to kind of see how education can really move the numbers and needles on behavioral change. All right. That's a little bit about me. Cool. Hooray. We're still having people introduce themselves. That's awesome. I love to see that we've got some people from other countries as well here. That's great. So in this presentation, again, you're welcome to ask some questions too, and I can jump off to hit whatever fork you want to go into. But I thought I'd start out with what is this darn thing called AI? There's several reasons I'm going to start there. If this feels remedial for you, I will call that out. I promise to go through this rather quickly, and we will get into a lot more deeper stuff as it goes on. But I do think that's kind of critical to start there a little bit because, for instance, actually, I'll just call this out. I had a friend who was recently traveling to the Middle East somewhere to give a conference and talk about AI. And he asked me, he was like, I don't know if I know enough about AI. But I was like, oh, no. And he's also in the middle of asking about AI in this presentation he was about to give. He was like, I'm not really sure. I'm kind of sometimes get nervous that it's going to take our jobs and all this other stuff. And anyway, so I wanted to kind of open up that conversation a little bit, just briefly, because I do think that once we understand how AI works, it really, really helps us start to understand how we can leverage it. And I think the hypothesis, this is where I very much agree with Christine, is that like it is now time to leverage AI. It's not something that we really have a lot of opportunity to choose not to. It's here and it's powerful. And it has a lot of opportunity for us. So anyway, we're going to first cover that. Then we're going to get to how to work with AI in course design and assessments, and a little bit of brief tutorial about what that looks like. Then we're going to talk about some tips of how to use AI, some prompt engineering, some other pieces like that, some early tips of on the ground, what that looks like and how to get the most out of it, and also how to expose your team. One thing I'd love to get to is how to expose your team to starting to use AI in their workflow. And then finally, a little bit about what's to come in the future, in the near future, and then potentially in a little bit longer future. Okay, cool. Again, if you're just getting here, feel free to welcome yourself or invite yourself, share who you are, where you're from, and then if you do have questions throughout this, feel free to shoot those forward. Without further ado, I'll get into the first part. So is AI going to take all our jobs? So that's I don't think so. So this comes up a lot. I don't think AI is going to take any of our jobs, but I do think it's instructive when people are concerned about it. I think it's instructive to look at the edge cases, and then furthermore, what we're going to kind of go from here is look into why there are edge cases. So we're going to talk into a little bit about how does AI work. Does anyone who's actually, I know some of the folks, hey, Garen, does anyone who's on this call want to volunteer to tell us a little bit, like give their little quick demo of how AI works? Anyone? Is that something we're able to do?
Yeah, if people are interested, you can raise your hand and we will unmute you.
Yes, I'm looking for a volunteer. Thanks, Charlie. Yes, looking for a volunteer to explain in I would say a minute or 2 minutes at most how AI works. And then I will give you virtual brownies. All right, Archie. Thank you, Archie. I really appreciate it.
All right, you should be able to speak, Archie.
Yep, I think so. I've just unmuted. Unfortunately, I have a Scottish accent, so it might be difficult for people to follow what I'm saying. There is a very good YouTube video called 11, and I think there's an American translation company called 11, and it's got the word 11 after it, which is based on that as well. So AI to me at the moment is in what I would call phase one. Phase one is where we're using it as a tool to fill in the gaps or to do all this sort of grunt work that we normally expect to do in a job. However, I think we're on the verge of moving into yet another phase of AI where it will actually take over a lot of the jobs that we normally associate with any kind of knowledge interface, people that know stuff who then use that knowledge in order to inform other people. Good example of that I was speaking to someone recently in Switzerland is the legal profession, where effectively people who work in that industry are relying on a vast sum of knowledge. You've seen obviously the leather-bound books that appear in every legal show on Netflix and so on. So that knowledge is just a whole collection of facts or tokens which an AI can process, and I use it in the company I work for part-time just now to create legal documents. I will just go into ChatGPT and I'll ask it to create a legal document based on X, Y, or Z and adjust it to perhaps the English legal system. Obviously, it needs some editing after that, but the majority of the work is done. And that's in what I would call phase zero. Phase one will move beyond that, where I would expect the AI system to be able to do the whole job for me, and I wouldn't have to do a hands turn on it. I just ask it a couple of questions, and the next thing it will churn out exactly what I need. In terms of education, what I'm looking forward to is a replacement for me. I used to be a really fantastic maths tutor. I don't do it anymore. That's why I'm not really fantastic anymore. It's not because I've declined in my ability to tutor maths, but in terms of what I was able to do with students, it was a very kind of responsive approach that I used. And that's where I'd like to see AI going. And I think that'll probably be in phase two, where an AI will be indistinguishable from me. It will know everything it knows about, that I know about maths, and a hell of a lot more. And also will be able to interface with a student in a way that enables the student to learn effectively by taking small steps, etc., etc.
Cool.
Anyway, that's enough for me. I'm sure.
No, thank you. Thanks. Yeah, thank you for volunteering. Happy to hear hope Scotland is having a wonderful early summer. All right, great. Yeah, and generally, I think that's a great. What I want to get into is a little bit about how it works. What I would say, generally speaking, agree with Archie. I think that the when you get to what I think he was defining as zero, or the place where essentially it totally replaces us, I think we're far away from that. Personally, I think much like self-driving, right, is a thing that we were like, hey, it's going to come here, it's already done. Some people claimed. We're still not there, right? And I think that AI is going to, along with us in our jobs, especially those thinking jobs that are out there, there's still a lot of work to do that. And then I'll get into why and et cetera right about now. But I think that was cool to get that perspective. I really appreciate it, Archie. And yeah, so here we see a mouth with a lot of teeth. This is one of the really common AI problems right now, is that AI has had trouble with teeth, with fingers. And one of the questions I want to kind of prompt to us is, why is that the case, right? It's very good at a lot of other things. It's actually starting to make movies. It's starting to make 3D models of cities in an instant. Why can't it get teeth, right? And so this is a little bit of like why, I think. So the background of how AI works. And the hypothesis is here, once you understand a little bit more, I think it becomes a better tutor to you and something to potentially work with, or a co-pilot, if you will. Microsoft's language there, I think, is solid. So let's imagine we have a student. We're going to go back to like a super traditional classroom. We've got student Montez, and then we have a soccer field. When we work with AI, we cannot train Montez. Montez in this case is the AI model. So you're going to have to come with me for a second. But Montez, the AI model, we're working on training him. We cannot instruct Montez on how to play soccer. We don't instruct, that's not how we work with AI. The way that we work with AI is we define the end goal. And the reason I choose soccer is it's a pretty simple game. So at least in terms of mental things, there's a lot more challenging things that AI is taking on. And the end goal in soccer is to put the ball into the opposing team's goal, not your goal, right? So it's very simple end condition. And the way that we train AI is we essentially say, Montez, the AI model, somehow get the ball into the goal. And the more that you do that, and if you do that more than your opponent, then you're winning and you're doing well. So essentially it has an end condition and it has no instruction whatsoever of how to get to the end condition. So what do you imagine would happen if you just took Montez, in this case, you can kind of think of it as a human or an AI, but like if you took Montez and you said, somehow get this ball in the goal, do you think he's going to learn quickly? Without any instruction, without any here's how to put your shoes on, here's how to put on shin guards, here's how to run around the field, here's how to kick a ball, etc. Not exactly, right? So the learning conditions are actually very slow in AI. And this is very much what we see. The advantage that AI has, as opposed to being Montez, just one student in a classroom, is that now imagine, this is where we're starting to understand how Montez is actually an AI bot, is that Montez never sleeps, first of all. He can clone himself into millions or trillions, if we like. So we can have millions of Montezes all trying to get the ball in the goal at the same time. He can play all of those clones simultaneously at the same time. And he can play against himself, or he can play against variations of himself all at the same time, constantly, without ever sleeping. Now, what is going to happen on the way there is Montez is going to do every single thing you would possibly imagine in soccer, including striking the ball back into his own net on numerous occasions. If the bounds of the soccer field are not perfect, if this were actually a video game and they weren't perfect, Montez would find a way outside of the soccer field and break the game. But essentially, in all of these iterations, millions and millions and millions of iterations of Montez never sleeping, playing soccer against himself, and weeding out the versions of Montez that don't win, Montez eventually gets really, really good at playing soccer. And so then here we have it. We have Super Montez on the right. And then we have actually, this is a machine learning, this is sort of an average look at what machine learning looks like in terms of the training examples that they go through. And the thing that's kind of neat to note here is that the first engagements are very slow. Generally speaking, when we're training these algorithms, they take a very long time at first, right? Because they know nothing about soccer. This is like the antithesis of how we would actually teach a human, because we're just saying, win, go get it. And so first they do the craziest things you'd ever imagine, but then slowly but surely that sort of climbs. And usually at some point, there's a point where it hits an asymptote. And then we get to sort of full training. And then that's sort of how it works out. So what's interesting about that, I think, is that at the very end of the day, our AI researchers, the people who are on the front lines of training these AI to work for us, do not actually understand. Once Montez becomes the greatest soccer player of all time and starts to beat human players at the game, we still cannot reverse engineer that AI. We don't actually understand how Montez learned that, because he learned it over millions and bazillions of iterations, and we cannot read back that code in a way that's humanly legible. So all we know is that somehow we've trained this thing that wins this game, and somehow it is extremely good and reliable at winning that game. And every time it's not, like every time there's a player that's a little bit better, it can very easily kind of adopt that player which is like the idea of adding a lot more data into our algorithm to then learn what those new techniques are and then eventually, become better than that. So I think this is important to realize that like we all don't understand exactly how it works. This is how we have really interesting edge cases. And this is also why, such as having way too many teeth, this is also why we can't immediately also fix those edge cases, right? Like we've known for a while that it has this, it has trouble understanding and differentiating the number of teeth that we have in our faces. Because it's not a thing that we actually built from the ground up, it actually built itself. We can't also just go into the code and say, hey, teeth number, set it to, whatever our teeth number. Actually, I should have looked that up before this, but whatever our average teeth number. And yes, I would also encourage you to look at, there's lots of different videos online that I think do an excellent job of teaching how AI works. The way, the sort of framework that I would give us, and this I think aligns with a lot of what Archie was saying, is there's this what I would call is the last mile problem. This is a quote from Dan Meyer. And this does apply to education. I think it also actually applies to legal as well as many other conditions of working with AI in most fields today, is that AI currently, if you work with it, can run at least the first 3 fourths of the race for you. If not even, if you're running a marathon, it can run 25 out of 26 miles. And so in practice, it's really, really good to start potentially with AI and learning good prompt engineering so it can actually create very close to an end goal. And then it is up for us to run that last mile. And that's where the humans kind of come in. And that's where the co-pilot nature comes in. So this last mile is the place where humans come in. And when it comes to building courses, this is what we're going to get to next, is like, how do we do that? But if you do believe, I will say, there's a lot of people giving time estimates about exactly how much time it takes. And I will say for sure, AI saves an awful lot of time. And the more that you work with it, of course, the better you get at saving time. The better, especially you learn at prompt engineering or learning even which AI tool to use. I highly encourage you to go out there and try all of them because they all have different sort of strengths and weaknesses right now. But if we believe in the 80-20 rule, we also realize that like that last mile sometimes can be pretty hard. And might actually be somewhat harder than the rest of the miles to some extent. And so I think, one, it's critical to have that human there, because actually, for instance, AI still has a very loose grasp on the concept of truth. And in fact, Conmigo, which many of you might be familiar with, it was an AI bot that was created by Khan Academy to train students over the last few years. Khan Academy, some researchers actually looked at Conmigo and the math that it was doing, because it gives math problems and it sort of says like, this is the answer and how to get to it. Quite a few, like it was at least 30% of its math was actually wrong in that bot. And so it was teaching math that was not correct to students, which is something that if we were a human, we would not necessarily be into that. And so that's one of those things that I think we have to be really careful about. That's especially where the last mile is important. And so one of the things I would say is we should not actually trust AI. We should definitely use it and utilize it, but we have to be very careful about trusting it because it is in fact wrong quite a bit. And, and this has been also, we've seen this in many other examples from Google and other press releases and things that have come out. It's definitely not always right. But if you do work with it from a human standpoint, that's the extra mile that we can kind of add on, is especially making sure it's authentic, et cetera. So I want to give you an example. We've been working with, Intellum has an in-house tool that is able to focus. This is what I also think is part of the future, but it's something that we already have in certain cases. So Intellum, if you're working with Intellum, the system, and you're building a course, you can actually train AI just on the course data itself, right? So it's looking just at your specific course, but then also using its library of ideas to feed into that. And so doing that, it can build learning objectives for you. It can also build assessment questions for you. We've especially been using it for assessment questions recently. And this was an AI generated assessment question, automatically generated, that was based on our course content. And so the way that this sort of works on the ground is we often then first of all, we've got learning objectives for our course. We have a lot of content. And then we start to create question pools based on these learning objectives, right? It's because we want to test to make sure that the objective is achieved in the course. So the process of doing that is we will first train it on these specific objectives, look at the course, and then get a pool of questions. From there, this is the last mile. A human then comes in and takes all of these questions. The really nice part about this, Christine was mentioning this in the last talk, is that one of the things that makes our assessments especially rigorous is the size of the question pools. For instance, in a lot of assessments online, we might only choose 5 questions per objective, but you might have a pool that's much deeper, say 15 questions that relate to that one objective. And so therefore, if Sam and Adam are taking the course next to each other, they're very likely to get different questions to assess the same objective. Therefore, it sort of minimizes cheating. There's a lot of ways in which the automatic sort of generation of AI can really help us, especially in the assessment terrain, because truthfully, if you just sort of think about it, creating assessment questions over and over again about the same content can be really mentally taxing and tough. It's also tough to be totally, I think, inclusive of all the different dimensions of an objective. And so when you have a machine that works with you to kind of spit out a lot, that really helps you sit in the evaluator place and work with that. Yeah. So here, for instance, is a rubric. We have a link to it. Actually, I'll kind of probably go from here. So, oops. This is the rubric, if you want to check it out. We made a rubric for both actually creating really great objectives with AI and also for creating really good assessment questions with AI. So this is one takeaway that I would highly recommend you use, or if you're, especially if you're new to this, or even if your team is still currently doing this. This is a rubric that especially trains the human to look at the last mile when looking at assessment questions. And so if we go, for instance, back to this, this is going to be a little bit hard to read from the screen. That's why I wanted to share the other screen with you. But this one is particularly about assessment questions. So there's 5 different criteria. You'll notice that these criteria are very much trained on that kind of this last mile piece. And these are things where, again, AI does not understand the text that it's creating at all. And this is where that human eye over it, especially because AI does not understand and can create and can hallucinate and create untrue things. This is why this stage is super critical. So we always want to make sure that it's aligning with our learning objectives. We always want to make sure that it's clear and precise. Sometimes there can be extra wordiness, things like that. One of the things that's really nice, I'll say, about working with AI, especially about voice, even in assessment questions, you can train the AI to get the right voice to be especially concise. You can ask it to do that. And you can also ask it to be precise as well. So sometimes, for instance, if your first AI generated question isn't quite right, you can also ask the AI to help itself to make itself better. And I think that's one of the sort of expert techniques that allows us to save even more time, is we don't necessarily have to go in always directly and change the language ourselves, but it's something that we can also ask the AI to do. We also want to make sure that it hits the right cognitive level. This is where, again, if it's generating a whole bunch of questions for us, we can sort of, as humans, label the cognitive levels of the questions that we're sort of receiving and making sure that we have a diverse set, so we're sort of nailing all the different parts of the learning objective that it would go along with. Relevance and authenticity. This is truthfully one of the places where I see the biggest opportunity in a lot of assessments as they relate to courses, is that if you look really hard at your assessment questions, I've seen this in numerous assessments out there, is that sometimes there are assessment questions that you cannot actually learn from the course directly. This is one of those natural human gaps that we sort of create. And one of the things you can work with AI here is actually on locating those gaps that could potentially be there in the course. Is like, where would I actually get this content? Because I think one of the things we want to make sure is that if students do take your course, that they can actually pass the exam and that all the information is actually in there. And that it's authentic to this real problem. The authenticity piece is also one of those places where I think we have to be careful, that's especially one of the pieces that we do find when working with AI to kind of look out for it, is sometimes there's a little bit of misunderstanding in terms of relevancy, and sometimes might use language that sounds really great, but isn't quite actually relevant and isn't quite exactly the right point. That continues to, again, get better and better. But in the learning space, I'll say this now that we learned a lot about how AI works, in the learning space, there's not a ton of data specifically about, like, for instance, data in the world of AI is going to be courses. And there's not too many people right now, this is definitely a problem that's being actively fixed, of just training data that's just about courseware or just about education. And when you have that data set, it's definitely going to help train and inform better AI, which is exactly why companies are now looking for that data set. They're looking for instructional designers and others to kind of elucidate, if we can just train it on a lot more data that's relevant to education, it's going to get a lot better. But and so that piece will get significantly better as it goes on, but that's definitely one of those pieces for opportunity. And then finally, there's this feedback potential, which I think is really important. It grasps at both the depth of the question as well as sort of the, where it can go from an educational standpoint. Cool. And thank you, Shannon, for dropping the rubric there. 20% of marathon is about 5 miles. Looks like I'm being cheated here with those. Yeah. Okay, cool. With that, let me just pause for a second and see if there's any questions either about this rubric or about sort of how, for instance, I'm very happy to answer any sort of questions about how that looks in person. I will say it does significantly reduce the amount of time that it takes to create assessments. It also, I would say, the neat thing is that we're really into, especially doing quality stuff at FreshCognate, we're always trying to push the boundaries of what we can do with education. My favorite thing about AI is it allows us to actually make a lot more rigorous assessments in general, just because we are able to have that automated generation. So working side by side with it, it really is an awesome tool to allow us to be a lot more comprehensive. And we use those time savings in cases to actually add that, especially to certifications and other material that we might work with. Okay, can you use human scoring in this rubric? Yeah, absolutely. You can use human. This is Charlie, I think that's a great question. These are definitely things that when we come to future, like for instance, within Intellum right now, there's work to train their algorithms or their AI. And actually that human scoring is very valuable to them. This is very much how actually a lot of early AI was trained. Google, when it did its PageRank algorithm, it actually had thousands or tens of thousands of humans around the world just clicking on websites and saying how good they were based on a rubric. And then that data went into the algorithm that helped inform it. Garen, question around larger pools to explore topics of culturally relevant or community contextualized assessment items. I think that's really neat. I think that's, I especially love that question, especially as we get more towards the future of personalized assessments, right? I think that's a land that we could get into, and certainly multiple choice questions, we have all sorts of biases laden in them in general. And so I think that could be a really powerful thing in the future. One of the things that always worries me is in our current day-to-day about doing anything that's especially related to pop culture or anything immediately relevant is that it goes out of date so incredibly fast when you work on these courses. And so one of the pieces about that is like, how do we potentially continue that over a length of time? And that's definitely one of the pieces I think in the future we want to get to is, yes, maybe all of the pieces of our courses can naturally sort of evolve with AI and actually provide more context and provide more personalization to our students. I think that's definitely possible. In practice, are you able to drop this table to properly train it, or do you have to reformat it? Is that for training the AI? Generally speaking, this table is used by the human, I would say, who's evaluating the questions. And what I would say is that in practice, you work with the table for, a little bit of time, and then you kind of, inherently understand the table. And then it allows you to speed up. The learning curve that we actually have in learning how to work with AI is also the same as like AI training itself. It starts out a bit slow, and then it gets a lot faster. All right. I'm going to keep going. I think we've got a lot more to cover. Thank you guys for the questions, though. I really appreciate it. So again, here's that. Shannon also dropped the link in the chat. So if you have any more questions around that, highly encourage you to use the rubric. Please check us out at FreshCognate. If you have questions about that, you can hit me up after. I'm happy to kind of chat about how we develop that. This is I just wanted to get this a little bit of theory piece out of the way too, because we're talking about rigor with assessments. It's really critical, of course, that we first start with our end in mind when we're developing courses. I still don't always see this happen. So we want to make sure that we first have our objectives and what are measurable about the outcomes of students, right? Once we have those, we can then create these question banks. And then one of the things that I think is a really nice feature in Intellum, some other platforms have this as well, is these Intellum, the question banks that are linked to specific objectives are also linked to specific courses. And so what you can do is you can have several, let's say our course has 10 objectives. Then we have 10 different question pools related to those objectives. If a student fails a question pool related to that objective, then we can actually serve them the direct content that they need that's relevant to improve their score on that question pool and eventually pass out of it. So this is a competency-based educational design model, essentially, for those playing along. But that's a really nice way in which we can kind of it's called an adaptive assessment, where we can make an assessment that shrinks down as students master the content. It also makes that potential like direct link between this evaluation and then how do you how do you get the message in the content to actually learn these pieces and help there. All right, so now we're going to get some tips on using generative AI in practice. I would definitely recommend talking to people about prompt engineering. I would definitely recommend Googling prompt engineering in the first place. You'll get a lot of tips. You'll get a lot of excellent AI videos. I could get more into it, but it would take another hour presentation. It's really nice to see just some of the frames that are out there. I've given you some of my favorites that I have been working with it over time. But again, it's one of those things that you will learn. It's also evolving as we work with the tool. Oh, actually, let me go back for 1 second. There was this takeaway on AI that I think is important, which is that this last one here. AI is what we call in the tech world an arrival technology and not an adoption technology. Let me explain the difference. And this is very much my viewpoint on essentially why I think we all need to be starting to work with AI, and also why our teams that we work with should all be adopting AI in the regular workflow. AI, in the extent to which it has changed the world and changed how we work, is something that we need to embrace. It is not something that's one of those. A lot of technologies are things that like, oh, have you started to use Bluetooth headphones? Cool, they make things a little bit better. The way that AI works, it is changing the very landscape with which we work. And so therefore, it is something we call an arrival technology. Therefore, it's not a thing that we unfortunately have a choice about. It's something that we're really in the standpoint of like, it's here now. It does, in fact, change the rules of the game. It definitely changes the rules of engagement. Archie told us earlier, you can definitely draft a legal contract. It might not be perfect, but you can draft it in seconds, right? And then you have that. The fact that it is that powerful means it's something that we all do need to somehow find our way to embrace. And I think how we do that with teams, that can make for a really interesting discussion, because of course, humans are not always big fans of things being foisted upon them. None of us really are. And not everyone's necessarily all about embracing change. So I think there are ways, for instance, when it does come to working with a team, what I would suggest is finding subtle ways to start to cue the teams to start to play with things. It might also be a professional development exercise to use AI to create different prompts or create images or things like that, to start to help people just get their feet wet with what it can do and what the power of it is. I think once people start to see the capacity of it and actually work with it themselves, that's really a big breaking moment. There's a lot of, I think, objection to AI just from, I think it's a brand new thing that's relatively unknown. And there can be a really big barrier there. My sense is that with most people, once you start to really get them working with it a little bit, especially in like a fun space where you're developing things just kind of for fun that are not necessarily work context at the beginning, is a really nice way to start to like break that kind of isolation from the way that we used to work to the way that we're going to kind of begin working now and into the future. Awesome. So a little bit about prompt engineering, tone. This is one of the things I really like. You can ask, like for instance, especially for writing a course, tone is really important, author tone, etc. And so if it's writing assessment questions, objectives, or even some of your content, you can ask it to change its tone. You can be like, be a little more sassy, be a little more, clinical, etc. And those words generally prompt incredibly well. You can also then ask it if it understands a question. So generally speaking, if I'm going to ask an especially complicated prompt, especially about something very, say minuscule in education, or that's like pretty obscure in the world of education, I can also ask it afterwards, do you understand? And that's all based on probability models that are coming from itself, but it's still actually a really valuable tool. And sometimes it will prompt you to ask or to answer or give more words as sort of keywords to help it. That way you're, again, helping with that relevance and clarity, which is one of those pieces that I think, AI can potentially, in the way that it works, it can definitely struggle with. And then also, this is, I think, one of my favorite parts about working with it in an assessment space, or especially in adding rigor to courses, is you can ask the AI itself to do some of the human stuff, some of the last mile stuff that we are currently doing. You can also ask the AI to do its own version of that and see how well it's going to do that. Which is really, really fun and pretty interesting, and again, can save you some time. And I think that's definitely one of those spaces that, again, as we develop and work with AI more in the future, especially within specific learning domains, these algorithms that are just working in education are going to get significantly better at automatically doing that. And therefore, the last mile problem that we have is going to become relatively smaller and smaller over time, so that it will be running eventually more of those miles for us, and even more of that last mile, so that maybe we're at the end only working with the last 0.25 or something like that in terms of just verifying truth. So big thesis here is like AI is a big tool. It's changing how we work. We do need to adopt it, but it is still just a tool. And I encourage you to not be too, there's an emotional element that comes into working with this, I think, from a curriculum standpoint for many of our jobs. It's not at nearly close, I think, yet to be able to replace our jobs, unless you do a very, very rote job. If your job includes any kind of evaluation and thought, there's a lot of, I think there's still a lot of space there in that. And I think it's really important for us to then all in our respective careers adopt this technology as we have all the other ones that have led us to today to help us. And one of the other pieces that I think is a really promising bit about the future is right now we're all working off of a lot of large language models that are trained on kind of everything. Eventually, we're going to have a lot of more domains. We already do have this in many places. If you do work with Intellum on this, there's now a domain-specific LLM that we're working with that is trained then specifically within this place. There's also a lot of emergence of chatbots and other things like that right now that are also this sort of, instead of being loosened on the entire world of content, they're looking at the content that you're learning. We can even tell our chatbot to be looking at just the stuff that we're currently looking at on that page and help us instruct with that, which is, one of those places where we're starting to get a lot more personalized about that learning journey and to get a lot more specific about exactly what we're talking about, which allows AI to be a lot more relevant and helpful to us. Cool. And then, the last mile per day mile, I think it's going to be a bit shorter. These private LLMs that are smaller are going to make a big difference. And it's time to embrace fully if you haven't already. And what I encourage you to do with that is definitely to try out a lot of different AI models that are out there. Gemini, ChatGPT, all of the other ones that are out there, there's plenty. It's neat to play with all of them to some extent to see which ones are most valuable. I will definitely tell you there's a difference, especially in voice and writing quality between the different models and then also between the generations of the different models too. That's the other thing you have to deal with. If you use ChatGPT for free, it's significantly different than actually if you buy it. Same thing with Gemini and other tools that are out there today. Cool. That's the end of the presentation. I do think all the AI bots, all the images throughout this presentation were created by AI as well. So thank you to them and the humans that directed them. All right, cool. What questions might we have?
All right. Yeah. Looks like we had a question come in from Archie around, and you've talked about this kind of like, where is AI heading? How close are we to AI tutors producing formative assessments on the fly in response to student errors? Any thoughts, any crystal ball predictions?
I love that question. Thank you, Archie. You're more brownies to you. So AI tutoring, I think, has a lot of, this is now just talking as an educational practitioner / somebody who's in, definitely interested in AI. AI tutoring, I think, as a tool, is one of the most equalizing tools we might have in the field of education. I'm super passionate about equity as it comes to education. One-on-one tutoring is incredibly valuable, and we have lots and lots of data on that, or on how valuable it is. Currently, that is all between human and student interactions that are usually video interactions. And currently that is incredibly costly, right? To have a human one-on-one with every student that's out there. I think there's an awful lot of opportunity in this space. In fact, I'm working on a project directly relevant to this space with MIT and some other universities, where we are looking at gathering a huge data set of AI tutoring. That might become a national database called the National Tutoring Observatory. Where we can actually have a huge data set that's specifically towards this AI tutoring and tutoring moves and following those human interactions that we can start to train these algorithms on those interactions. So currently, I would say, like, right now, there are definitely tutoring bots out there. I think that there's an awful lot of room to improve. And right now, much like a lot of the nascent fields in AI, it's going to first start with having a really, really good set of data. And right now, no one has a particularly humongous set of data except for some of the providers that actually do tutoring specifically right now. Hopefully that answers that pretty well. I love that point though. I think it's going to be a huge game changer, especially in terms of getting a really, really high quality education to students everywhere, hopefully.
Awesome. And
Oh
then
no, Archie, I was really afraid you're gluten-free or something. Okay, we will dream of something and we'll send it to you via AI.
Dean has a question for you around, it's a two-part question. What is your favorite Gen AI engine? And then what's your favorite large language learning model?
For Gen AI, yeah. I really like, I've worked with DALL-E 2 for a while, or DALL-E, the world of DALL-E for Gen AI for images and other pieces. I'm especially interested, there's some newer models now that are doing 3D work and movie work. Those I think are especially powerful. DALL-E has stood out to me on the image side in general. When it comes to LLMs, this is where I feel like I've noticed. I will actually say this too with Gen AI is it's again helpful to use numerous images or engines. It's one of those things that when you're trying to really get something specific, sometimes the most helpful thing is not necessarily to get so much better at your prompt engineering, but is actually just to jump to a different engine and try that for a second. And I think this is true of LLMs as well, is they do have strengths in different places. For instance, for a while, for a very short while, I thought that Gemini was actually doing a lot better with voice, especially authorial voice. I like to play around. Once upon a time, I was a poet and an English major. And so I like to play around with these tools, especially in emulating authors' voices. And there was a short time where actually I thought Gemini had a pretty big lead in that. And then actually more recently, I would actually say that ChatGPT is doing a better emulation of specific voices of writers and things like that. And so that, again, when it comes to like writing courses, at the moment, ChatGPT has been my tool of choice. Then again, I still tend to jump around quite a bit. Good question. Hope that's helpful.
All right, we have another question from Vibu. I've tried to create assessments using AI, but for some reason, some of the questions are not actually from the content that we provide. And right, so this is why Christine was talking about trust but verify. How can we filter our content to get better assessment questions?
Yeah, is that so? Now I immediately want to solve this problem. I'm not sure if if you're doing that within Intellum or within another space. So the first question is sort of like whether or not the AI is properly trained on just your content. Is it pulling stuff from that's completely irrelevant from the course, or is it a misunderstanding of the course? Is basically the thing that I'm trying to sort out there. And then from there, we can sort of diagnose the issue. I'm happy to kind of, again, you can reach me if you go to freshcognate.com. You can find me on LinkedIn at Doug Pietrzak. And I'm happy to kind of follow up with anyone on any further questions. It is just a math, isn't it?
I know the next session is on how Accenture is implementing AI and Melody. I popped the link in the chat. So if people are not yet registered, if you already registered, don't worry, Zoom has sent you the link for the next session. But if you haven't registered yet, you can do that through the link in the chat. And Melody is going to be talking about how they've implemented AI, including AI generated assessments. And then one of the things that she'll talk about, I don't want to spoil it all, but is like, sometimes when AI is giving you the wrong questions, we have an opportunity to go back and look at the content, right? Because if AI is kind of using what it's been fed and then it's pumping out the wrong answer, then there's a possibility our students or our learners also don't understand the content, the way that it's being delivered. So she'll talk a bit about that as well.
Cool.
And then Christine was talking about, sometimes we just like go back and we iterate on our prompt because sometimes we need to be a little bit more specific.
Yep.
Any other questions? If not, we'll wrap up here, but appreciate everybody jumping on today and joining us. And thank you, Doug, for sharing and walking us through and even just like pulling AI into your presentation so we could kind of see it live and in action.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you guys. And yeah, feel free to follow up. Thank you, Shannon. Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Christine, who went before, and the people following. It's cool to be part of the panel. So
awesome. Cool. Well, with that, we'll give you all a few minutes back. There is a brief survey at the end of this. If you let us know what you liked, what you want to hear more about, that helps us to create great content and make sure that we are hosting webinars that you want to tune into, like this one. So please fill that out and we will see you hopefully for Melody's presentation in about 10 minutes.
yeah.
All right. Bye for now.